If you are still unsure, you're actually in good company, because all of the followers of Jesus, even with the resurrection on Monday, were like, wait, what? How is this working? And they had to renegotiate and figure out what it means to believe in the midst of their belief. Hey everybody, welcome to Whiskey and the Writings. My name is Joe. I am your host, and I'm so glad that you're here on another episode. Boy, we've got a good one for you as we're sitting on the day after Easter. It's Monday after Easter if you're watching this on Monday, but maybe you're not, and that's okay too. We're going to have a conversation about belief and the resurrection and the implications of it. And I think we're going to come at an angle that maybe we haven't thought of before or considered before. And so if you're someone that is really in a space where, you know, you're wanting to put your trust in Jesus, but you're just not sure, and maybe you have not felt safe to actually wrestle with that uncertainty, this is going to be a good episode for you, because we're going to find out that you're actually in pretty good company. So with that being said, we're going to get started with some whiskey. What I've got in front of you is some Yellowstone, and this is a whiskey I've never had before. So we're having it for the first time on this channel. I've gotten to taste a little bit of it before we got started, because I didn't want to be blown away out of the bottle, because it's 100 proof. And I remember I tried a 100 proof a while back on a few videos back, and I did a open bottle taster, and it hit me so hard. It was pretty funny, but I wanted to open it up, let it breathe a little bit so we could taste it together. But what's unique about this Yellowstone is that it's been finished in rum casks. Ooh, I thought that was interesting. I've never seen that before. So I've never had Yellowstone. I've never had a Kentucky straight bourbon that's been finished in a rum cask. So that's exciting. It already has taste, like notes that I can smell, like of the caramel. But I'm really curious how the rum flavor is going to come through in this bourbon. So I have a little bit of it here poured, and it's been just breathing. And so we're going to go ahead and try that now. It smells really good. And it is. That is super flavorful. And the unique things, I don't drink a lot of rum. But boy, I can taste it. The notes are there. And so it's got that interesting combination where you're getting a little bourbon, you're getting a little rum, which I didn't, how those two things were going to pair together. Very interesting. So it's a very slight, subtle. You get a little on the back end, you get a little bit of that rum taste, I guess. Not a bad whiskey. I really like it. So that's what I'm drinking today, and thoroughly enjoying it. Whatever you have in front of you, cheers, drink responsibly, and we're going to get started. Okay, folks, one quick note. I want to make an observation. So a couple things I just want you to know about. I want you to visit storiesoftove.com. It's our website that is the parent company to Whiskey and the Writings. In it, you can sign up for our newsletter. And our newsletter, a couple things happen. One, I send a weekly newsletter email out that's called I'm Just Saying. And it's just thoughts that I have for the week, like a quick 3 to 5 minute read that start your week off thinking about theology, thinking about life, thinking about faith. And it's just a good way to kind of just start your week off. So at 9 a.m. every Monday morning, you can get a I'm Just Saying sent right to your inbox. So I want to invite you to participate in that, and also see the other things that we do on this in this ministry called Stories of Tove. We have Barstool Theology. So if you're local in the Treasure Valley area, come join us at a Barstool Theology, where we come and together and we ask questions and we wrestle together out loud. I write a lot of extra content on the side, so you can check out those things as well. But I just want to make sure that you know about that. Go check out storiesoftove.com and sign up for our newsletter. Would love to have you be a part of that. And we're going to get into it. Here we go. It is the day after Easter Sunday. Again, if you're watching this on the Monday that this releases. So that's what I'm recording. And I had this thought that I want to think through with you. So this isn't something I've ever preached before. It's not something I've ever taught on before. It's just a thought exercise that I think is valuable, and I would like to just talk about it with you. So that's what we're going to do. It's just you and me. And I want to share with you something I've been thinking about. Okay. So when we think of Easter, it is such a huge moment in the Christian calendar, as it should. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I'm just saying it is what it is. It's huge. It's big. And churches everywhere make a big deal about Easter Sunday. I worked at churches where we would plan for months for Easter Sunday, the best worship songs and the best sermons and all of the big show and the flashy, we got to get everybody in, you're doing social media stuff where you have the pastor making a reel or a video going, we want to invite you to one of our 15 services this Sunday. Come join us. We made room for you. And then join us for the Easter egg hunt after, I'm not saying those things are bad. It's very marketing driven, right? Get you in the door. It's like, sell. That's how it feels sometimes. In fact, I was having a conversation just this morning with another pastor in our area, and I really appreciated his take on Easter because I asked him, I said, hey, you guys getting ready? It's a busy day tomorrow. I'm recording this on a Saturday. And so I appreciated, so Brian, if you're watching, and I just, blessings on you, man. I really loved your heart in this. He was like, you know what? No, we actually do what we always do. Because if we do have a guest come and show up and is giving church a try again, or for the first time, we want them to experience what our community is like on a regular basis. And I just found that so refreshing. And so Brian, if you're watching that, dude, kudos to you. Blessings on you. But all that to say, Easter's a big deal, right? And it should be. In fact, it's the most important part of our Christian calendar. If you're a follower of Jesus, Easter should be bigger than Christmas. I'm just going to say, right? It's Christmas has become in the West the biggest thing ever. You spend an entire month on Jesus coming and then a single day on him coming back to life, which is a bigger deal than him coming, in my opinion. All that to say, his resurrection is huge, and it should be. But no one stops to ask the question, what happens on Monday? So Sunday's a huge deal, and all this hype and all this celebration and all these things that take place. And then Monday shows up and you got to go back to work. You got to go back to your normal lives. You're just, you had this high on a Sunday morning. It was wonderful. It was exciting. And then it's Monday. And I wonder what that impact was like for the first followers of Jesus, right? They had just experienced the resurrection, like Jesus is alive, and then Monday shows up. What do you do on Monday, right? Are you like, well, what do we do now? How do we make sense of this? And so I want to explore with you some thoughts and ideas that I have around the Monday after Easter. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me set the stage here real quick with some text pieces that I think are important to this conversation. And I want to start with the biography of Matthew. This is, the 4 biographies. We call them gospels. If you're in church circles, I like to call them biographies because that's what they are. They are theological biographies that are written to communicate the life of Jesus in such a way that you're willing to put your trust in him. That's what they are. So in Matthew, you have in chapter 28, which is the resurrection story in Matthew's gospel. In Matthew chapter 28, you have it written in a particular way that I think is how, when we think of the resurrection story, this is how we think of it. Okay. So in Matthew chapter 28, the final chapter of Matthew, you move from at the beginning of chapter 28, the resurrection. So the stones rolled away, the women are there, go tell my disciples. And so in verse 10, it says, then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid, go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, there they will see me. So that's verse 10. Then you have an interesting story in verse 11 all the way through 15 that's about the guards and what they do and how the religious leaders conspire with the guards to make up a story about how the disciples stole the body. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. But then it jumps right back to the action in verse 16. And verse 16, you have all of the disciples gathered together in Galilee on the mountain, and Jesus gives them instructions to say, go into all the world, preach the gospel, discipling them, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Spirit, and then he ascends, right? And so this is how we oftentimes picture the story of the resurrection. It goes from resurrection, and then on the same day, he's on the mountain and he ascends and he goes to be with God forever. And then the disciples go out and they start the church. And that's the picture sometimes that's painted. It goes right from resurrection right to ascension. But guess what? That's not how it happened. I mean, it happened, but the gap between verse 10 and verse 16 of Matthew's gospel is 40 plus days. 40 days have passed from verse 10 in Matthew's gospel until verse 16. Let's dive into that because I think there's some interesting things taking place. The first thing that we notice is in Luke's gospel. At the end of Luke's gospel, what he tells us is an interesting story about two disciples of Jesus heading home out of Jerusalem. So this would have been on a Monday. They're walking home. Maybe it was Sunday, most likely. I think it was maybe Monday or a little bit later. But they're walking home to Emmaus, and it's the story called Jesus on the road to Emmaus is kind of how we talk about it. And Jesus has these two disciples that are walking home, and they're having conversation about what had just taken place. And they were debating and talking about these things. And it says this. In verse 17, Jesus shows up on the road. They're walking home. They're out of Jerusalem. Jesus appears and he's walking with them, but they don't recognize who he is, which is a fascinating thing to think about, but they don't know who he is. So it says that they're walking and he says to them, he asks them the question, what are these matters you are discussing so intently as you walk along? So Jesus goes, hey, what do you guys seem like in a heated debate. What are you talking about? And I love this response. And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who didn't know the things that have happened here in these days? And Jesus, tongue in cheek, right? It's Jesus. They don't know it's Jesus. And he goes, what things? I love it. Cleopas goes on, the things concerning Jesus the Nazarene, a man who is with his powerful deeds and words proved to be a prophet before God and all the people. So they had a belief about him. And how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. So in this, you have this moment. Jesus is resurrected. So let's just say, if we want to keep it on a Sunday, let's just pretend that Jesus goes from the burial site where he sees the disciples, and then maybe he disappears and he appears to these people walking, but they don't recognize who they are. And he has this conversation with them, and notice what they say. Like, you're the only one that hadn't heard what had taken place. They killed him. They killed this guy that was mighty in deed and word. And we thought he was a prophet. And we had hoped that he was the one that was going to fix all the brokenness that we have in our hope in our nation and us as a people. They're alluding to the reality of the promised Messiah. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, I did a whole video on Messiah. You can search it, find it, that talks about what that is, the anointed one. But they had hopes that he was going to fix everything. So, okay, we could talk forever about that. That's not the point of this. The point is we move not from gravesite on a mountainside ascending. We move from gravesite to walking on a road. Presumably, maybe we can say on the same day, but potentially not the same day, maybe a Monday, a Tuesday. Okay, what else do we see? So that's interesting. You have in John's biography in chapter 20 and 21, two statements that allude to more information about what's happening between Jesus's resurrection out of the grave and his ascending up to God, the ascension moment that you get in Matthew 28:16. What's happening in between? Well, we have more information. In John chapter 20, you have the disciples coming together, they're meeting. Jesus had appeared to them, but not all of them. Not all of the disciples are with this first appearance, only some of them, because later on in verse 24, you get the story of a guy, one of the disciples, Thomas, who shows up on the scene, and all the disciples are like, dude, he's alive. He's back. And Thomas is going, essentially is how I read it. Like Thomas is going, I'm not stupid, right? You guys seem pretty convinced, and that's fair. But I know how death works. And I know how Romans kill people. When the Romans kill people, they erase you from history. You are wiped off the earth in horrific ways. So he says, unless Jesus shows up right here and I can touch his hands and touch his side, I will never believe, right? That's powerful words. Well, later on, it says this in verse 26. Okay. And again, I could talk about that story forever, and I think I probably have in another video, but I want to pull out an observation. This is what we do when we read the Bible. We should be observing the details, because a little detail jumps in verse 26. 8 days later, the disciples were again together in the house, and Thomas was with them. Okay. So the story goes on that Jesus shows up. Thomas is able to touch the hands, the side, and then Jesus disappears again. The thing that I want to note about this story, the observation, is that it's been 8 days. So no longer are we like road to Emmaus, maybe a day, maybe not a day. We are 8 days later, and Jesus is still showing up to people. Then you get in verse 1 of chapter 21, right after the Thomas story, it says this: after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the sea. So let's just go a linear way of thinking. Let's just pretend that they're in this room, they're all meeting together, and Thomas is there, and Jesus shows up. It's been 8 days, so we at least know it's been 8 days. And Jesus shows up, and we have the moment, they touch, and then he disappears. And then John, the one writing, goes, okay, and then he showed up again, but this time we're on the sea. And he has this whole story about Peter fishing, and Jesus shows up and he has breakfast with Peter on the beach. We can maybe assume that they went right from that room and they just immediately went fishing, and maybe it's the same day. But the way the text is written is that it alludes to that this is sometime later. So even in John's gospel, so in Luke's gospel, we have a moment of Jesus showing up sometime later on the Emmaus. Then we have 8 days later. Then we have him showing up on a beach. The text is actually giving us more than what Matthew gives us from verse 10 to verse 16 in Matthew chapter 28. Something's going on, okay? It even gets more interesting. In the writing called Acts, which is the part 2 of the story that Luke tells us about Jesus's life. So part 1 is about Jesus. Part 2 is about Jesus's followers, Jesus' people. So Jesus people, Luke, Acts. They're paired together. They're separated in our Bibles by the Gospel of John because for other reasons, we don't need to go into that because that doesn't matter. But in Acts, we have Luke recalling the moments of Jesus's life before he ascends to be with God, the Matthew 28:16 moment. And this is what Luke tells us. This is in verse 3. The followers of Jesus, just setting the stage here, the followers of Jesus are all together. They've gathered together, and it says this in verse 3. So this is what Luke writes. To the same apostles also, after his suffering, he presented himself alive with many convincing proofs. Okay. Now that's fascinating. So Jesus, after his coming out of the grave, is going around spending multiple days, 8 we know in John's gospel, a few more days according to John 21 and maybe the end of Luke's gospel. But then Acts really amps this up. He spent time convincing them that he was alive. Think about that for a second. Jesus resurrects and still has to convince them with many signs. There's like, it wasn't instantaneous. And that's the thing I'll hit on here is we move this to its point. But let's go on. So he presented himself alive with many convincing proofs. He was seen by them over a 40-day period and spoke about matters concerning the kingdom of God. What? Here's the thing that you may not have thought about. Jesus resurrects on Sunday and is popping in and out on the earth, doing miracles, convincing people, talking about the kingdom of God, helping people like Thomas believe, helping people like the 2 on the road to Emmaus believe for 40 days. Jesus spends 40 days with his disciples after his resurrection. Picture that for a second. I mean, you could go as far as in 1 Corinthians 15. Here's another interesting statement. So in this is a letter to a community of churches in Corinth. And Paul writes this in chapter 15, one of the most brilliant chapters in all of the text about the resurrection is 1 Corinthians 15. And in verse 3, he says these words. He says, "For I passed on to you of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the 3rd day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," which is Peter, "then to the 12." And look at verse 6 here. This is 1 Corinthians 15, verse 6. "Then he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at one time." Now, picture this. Like we gotta stop reading so fast. Slow down. What did you just read? You just read Paul writing to a community of believers in the city of Corinth, reminding them of the thing he taught them when he was there, that he himself was taught when he first converted or transitioned into being a follower of Jesus. This creed about Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and his appearance, and one of those appearances was to 500 brothers and sisters at one time. And then listen to what he says here. I love this. It's like real history in front of us. "Most of whom are still alive." Wow. It's like Paul is asking or begging them to go, "You still don't believe?" There's people still alive that can testify to what I'm just telling you. Okay? So why do I tell you this? Okay? Because I want to draw out the reality that the Monday after resurrection did not seal the deal for people who had put their trust in him. There were still doubts, concerns, fears, worries. Jesus still had to teach them about the kingdom according to Acts, still had to perform miracles to prove what had taken place. And here's what I think is fascinating about all of that, is that belief and believing can be two different things. Let's break this down. In the text, when you get these words of belief or have faith, it's using a Greek word, pistos, which a better English word than faith and belief can actually be, in my opinion, the word trust. So the text of the New Testament is inviting you to make your first step as a step of trust, which simply says, I'm willing to trust, put my trust that the way of Jesus is the way forward for me. Which isn't saying I have everything figured out. I have all my questions answered. The text is simply inviting you into a relationship of trust. But that's not where it ends. Because belief is a system of thoughts that get formed in our minds and in our hearts that support our trust. So believe and believing can be two different things. I can believe, which is to put my trust, but to continue believing requires work on my end. It's this invitation that we work out the trust that we have with curiosity and wonder and questions and thoughts and wrestling and conversation. And what happens oftentimes in religious systems, and we challenge this a lot on Whiskey and the Writings, not because I don't believe in church or that you should go to church or that churches are bad. My wife and I, we attend a church. We are a part of a church. We support and help make that community what it is. Like, it's not about being anti-church. It's about recognizing when the systems that are created actually numb you to the beauty and the exploration of faith. When the systems of religion cause you to shrink your thoughts, you're actually misaligning yourself to where the biblical text is inviting us into. Because what you see, as I flesh this out live in front of you, what you see is people who had followed Jesus for 3-ish years experience great tragedy at the hands of the religious system and their use of the political system to manipulate their religious ideologies to have murdered the one that they were following and believed. As you heard the people at the road of the two on the road to Emmaus, we had hoped that he was going to be the one. And that's just not the case anymore. Then they have to face the reality of resurrection, and they're needing to renegotiate what it actually means to believe. And did you know this happens all the time? We begin by putting our trust. Then something terrible happens, oftentimes at the hands of religious institutions and systems that betray us. The people betray us, not systems. Systems can't betray you. People betray you. But the people that are supporting those systems betray you. They cause hurt and pain. And you're sitting there left going, I believe, but my unbelief is taking over. Like the man who came to get his daughter healed, his child healed. And Jesus says, do you believe? And he says, I believe, help my unbelief. And then we have to renegotiate what it actually looks like for us to believe. I mean, isn't that on some level a bit of deconstructing and reconstructing? Aren't we all moving into spaces where it's like, I want to trust, but I got to work this out. What does this actually mean? When I see the systems that are in play actually abusing what I read as a kingdom-centric methodology. All that to say, I want to encourage you with this. On the Monday after Easter, and it's like, what do we do now? If you are still unsure, you're actually in good company. Because all of the followers of Jesus, even with the resurrection on Monday, were like, wait, what? How is this working? And they had to renegotiate and figure out what it means to believe in the midst of their belief. So wherever you're at, and whatever you're at in that journey of your trust, I want to invite you to your first step to be just trust, and then go on the journey of working out the rest. And that's okay, because that journey is something you see modeled in the text. And it's an invitation for us to live in a space where wonder still exists, where mystery is still a part of the story, where the questions, where the doubt, where the fear and the concern can both coexist with a trusting, abiding, ongoing relationship with Jesus. I want to invite you into that reality. And if you're in that space, know that you're okay. You're okay. Because it took Jesus 40 days appearing, teaching about the kingdom, performing miracles. Imagine that, 40 days. And it's like, oh my gosh. They still needed to get it. And they struggled with it. And we all do the same thing, don't we? So it's okay. Take your time. Our God is patient. He's walking with you. And hold on to that wonder. Hold on to those questions. And maybe Whiskey in the Writings could be a place where you can explore those things with me. So leave your comments, leave your feedback, good or bad. Hey, bring it on. And maybe I'll make a video about a question that you have. Maybe I'll respond in a comment. But I just want to say thank you for being on the journey with me as we sit on this Monday after Easter and reflect on the reality that after resurrection, there was still work to do. And there was still faith that needed to be worked out and renegotiated in light of the things that they had just experienced. And if you're in that place of renegotiation, you're actually not in a bad place. So keep pursuing, keep wondering, keep asking questions. And as much as I can, I'll be along that journey with you. So that being said, thanks for joining me on this episode of Whiskey in the Writings and this post-Easter episode. We'll catch you next week. Cheers.